November 17, 2022, Pender County landfill. The acrid smell of decomposing waste hung heavy in the air as search teams methodically combed through mountains of garbage. For 2 weeks, this had become their grim reality, sifting through refuse, hoping against hope that they wouldn't find what they were looking for. But they did. The discovery of 16-year-old Miyonna Jones's remains among the debris wasn't just the end of a desperate search. It was the beginning of a revelation so shocking that it would shatter every assumption about family, trust, and the people we believe would never hurt us. Because the person responsible for putting her there wasn't a stranger who snatched her off the streets. It wasn't some random predator lurking in the shadows. It wasn't even an acquaintance with questionable intentions. It was her own half-brother, Miyonna Jones, someone who shared her bloodline, her family gatherings, her childhood memories. Someone who was supposed to protect her, defend her, stand by her side against the world. Instead, he became the very monster she needed protection from. This isn't your typical true crime case where we spend episodes wondering who could have committed such a heinous act. The identity of the perpetrator was established relatively quickly. What makes this case so profoundly disturbing is the relationship between victim and killer. A bond that should have been sacred, twisted into something unspeakably evil. When investigators first began connecting the dots, even seasoned law enforcement officials struggled to process what they were uncovering. Here was a young woman who had been sexually assaulted, murdered, and discarded like garbage by someone she called family. Someone who knew her routines, her vulnerabilities, her complete trust in him. The morning of November 1st, 2022, Miana was last seen getting into a car with Miyonna. She had no reason to fear him. Why would she? He was her brother. Brothers are supposed to drive their sisters places. Brothers are supposed to look out for their younger siblings. Brothers are supposed to be safe. But Miyonna Jones had other plans that morning. What happened in that car would remain Miyana's final moments of life. The details of her suffering are so disturbing that prosecutors would eventually seek the death penalty, reserved for only the most heinous crimes. The level of violence, the sexual assault, the complete betrayal of familial trust painted a portrait of evil that seemed almost incomprehensible. Yet perhaps the most disturbing aspect wasn't just what Miyonna did to his sister. It was what happened afterward, the systematic cover-up, the web of lies, the involvement of other family members who chose to protect the perpetrator rather than seek justice for the victim. His girlfriend, Randy Johnson, actively obstructed the investigation, providing false information and hampering efforts to find the truth. Even his grandmother attempted to hinder law enforcement's work. Multiple people who should have been demanding answers instead chose to shield a murderer. This raises uncomfortable questions about family loyalty versus moral duty. When does protecting a family member cross the line into becoming an accomplice? How many people were willing to let Miyana's death go unanswered to save Miyonna from consequences? The Jones family wasn't dealing with a case of mistaken identity or false accusations. They knew what he had done. They knew an innocent 16-year-old girl had been brutalized and killed. They knew her mother was desperately searching for answers. Yet some chose silence and obstruction over truth and justice. This case forces us to confront an uncomfortable reality. Sometimes the greatest danger comes from those closest to us. The statistics are staggering, but this isn't about numbers. This is about the fundamental violation of trust that should exist within families. When we think about teaching young people about safety, we focus on stranger danger. We tell them not to walk alone at night, not to get into cars with people they don't know, not to meet internet strangers, but who teaches them what to do when the threat comes from inside their own home? Miyonna Jones had access to his sister in ways that no stranger ever could. He knew her schedule, her habits, her trust. He exploited every advantage that family relationship provided, turning that sacred bond into a weapon against her. The betrayal extends beyond just the act itself. It's the knowledge that someone who shared family dinners with Miana, who celebrated holidays with her, who was part of her everyday life, was capable of such monstrous behavior. Someone she may have confided in, laughed with, or turned to for support. How do you reconcile the person you thought you knew with the person capable of such horrific acts? How do you trust anyone again when someone so close could harbor such darkness? Before we continue with this heartbreaking story, I want to hear from you. What do you think makes betrayal by family members so particularly devastating compared to crimes committed by strangers? Have you ever had your trust completely shattered by someone close to you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're new to True Crime Case Tapes, make sure to subscribe because we cover cases that matter, stories that need to be told, and victims who deserve to be remembered. Now, let's talk about who Miyonna Jones really was, and why her death represents such a profound loss. Miyonna Jones was everything a mother could hope for in a daughter. At 16, she possessed that rare combination of youthful energy and genuine warmth that made her stand out among her peers at New Hanover High School in Wilmington, North Carolina. Teachers remember her as the student who would light up a classroom simply by walking in, not because she was loud or attention-seeking, but because her presence carried an infectious positivity that others gravitated toward. Her academic performance was solid, but what truly set Miyonna apart was her character. She had this remarkable ability to connect with people across different social circles. Whether it was the shy kid sitting alone at lunch or the popular students planning weekend activities, Miyonna moved through her high school world with an ease that came from genuine kindness rather than social calculation. Friends described her as someone who remembered birthdays, who checked in when you were having a bad day, who could make you laugh when everything felt overwhelming. She wasn't just present in people's lives. She was engaged, invested in their happiness and well-being, the kind of friend who would drop everything to help someone through a crisis. At home, Miyonna was the center of her mother Miyonna Jones' world. Their relationship went beyond the typical mother-daughter dynamic. They were genuinely close friends who shared dreams, fears, and hopes for the future. Miyonna often spoke about how proud she was of the young woman her daughter was becoming, how excited she was to watch Miyonna grow into her full potential. Miyonna had dreams that extended far beyond the boundaries of Wilmington. She talked about college, about making a difference in the world, about building a life filled with purpose and meaning. Those conversations with her mother weren't just teenage fantasies. They were carefully considered plans backed by the determination and work ethic that defined her approach to everything. Her social media presence reflected who she was in real life: authentic, optimistic, genuinely interested in the people around her. No carefully crafted image or desperate attempts at perfection, just a teenager sharing moments of joy, friendship, and everyday life with the people she cared about. But November 1st, 2022, started like any other Tuesday morning in the Jones household. Miyonna woke up in the home she shared with her extended family, including her half-brother Jerice. Nothing about that morning suggested it would be any different from countless others that had come before. At approximately 5:30 a.m., Miyonna was seen for the last time by members of the public. She was on South 7th Street in Wilmington, a location that wasn't unusual for her morning routine. What witnesses observed seemed completely normal. A teenage girl going about her early morning activities, probably heading to school or meeting friends. What those witnesses didn't know was that this ordinary Tuesday morning would mark the end of Miyonna's life. Within hours, a vibrant 16-year-old with unlimited potential would be dead, though it would take weeks for anyone to discover the truth about what happened to her. The timeline of that morning becomes crucial when trying to understand how quickly everything went wrong. At 5:30 a.m., Miyonna was alive and visible to others, but somewhere between that final public sighting and the end of the day, her life was violently taken from her. For Miyonna Jones, November 1st became the day her world stopped making sense. When Miyonna didn't come home that evening, concern began to build. Miyonna wasn't the type of teenager who disappeared without explanation. She maintained regular communication with her mother, checked in regularly, and generally followed the household rules about staying in touch. But as the hours passed and phone calls went unanswered, that initial concern transformed into genuine worry. Miyonna began reaching out to Miyonna's friends, checking with classmates, calling anyone who might have seen her daughter or had any information about where she could be. The responses were all the same. No one had seen Miyonna since early that morning. Her friends were equally concerned. This wasn't like her at all. Miyonna didn't just vanish without telling anyone where she was going or when she'd be back. By the end of November 1st, Miana knew something was seriously wrong. But when she tried to report her daughter missing to local authorities, she encountered an obstacle that would haunt her for the rest of her life: the waiting period. Law enforcement protocols required a 24-hour waiting period before officially accepting a missing person report for someone Miyonna's age. Despite Mia's insistence that this was completely out of character for her daughter, despite her growing panic and desperate pleas for immediate action, she was told to wait. That waiting period, those crucial first 24 hours when Miyonna might still have been found alive, became a source of profound frustration and regret for Mia. Every hour that passed felt like a lifetime. Every phone call that went straight to voicemail increased her terror about what might be happening to her daughter. November 2nd, 2022, arrived with no word from Miyonna. No text messages, no phone calls, no signs of life from a girl who had never gone more than a few hours without contacting her mother. Mia immediately contacted the Wilmington Police Department to file an official missing person report. The anguish in Mia's voice when she spoke to officers was unmistakable. This wasn't a typical runaway situation or teenage rebellion. This was a mother who knew with absolute certainty that something terrible had happened to her child. Once the missing person report was officially filed, the Wilmington Police Department launched a comprehensive search operation that would consume the next 2 weeks. Detective teams spread across the city, canvassing neighborhoods, interviewing potential witnesses, and following up on every possible lead that might provide clues about Miyonna's whereabouts. The initial phase focused on her known associates and regular hangout spots. Officers visited New Hanover High School, spoke with teachers and classmates, and mapped out her typical daily routes. They examined her social media accounts, phone records, and any digital footprints that might indicate where she had gone or who she had been in contact with. As the days passed without any substantial leads, the search expanded beyond Wilmington city limits. Law enforcement coordinated with neighboring counties, putting out alerts and distributing Miyonna's photograph to extend the reach of their investigation. The community rallied around the search efforts, with volunteers joining organized searches and distributing missing person flyers throughout the region. But it was during this intensive investigation that detectives began focusing on the people closest to Miyonna. Family members, friends, and anyone who had regular contact with her became subjects of detailed questioning. This is when Miyonna Jones first appeared on law enforcement's radar as more than just a concerned family member. The breakthrough came when investigators started reconstructing the timeline of November 1st with meticulous precision. Multiple witness interviews revealed a crucial piece of information. Miyonna had been seen alone with Miyonna in his vehicle during the early morning hours when she disappeared. This wasn't just a casual observation. Witnesses specifically remembered seeing them together because of the timing and location. When detectives pressed Miyonna about this interaction, his account began showing inconsistencies that raised immediate red flags. Under questioning, Miyonna provided a version of events that didn't align with the timeline investigators had established through other witnesses and evidence. His explanations about where they had gone, why they were together, and what had happened during that car ride kept changing with each subsequent interview. Phone records became another crucial piece of the puzzle. Analysis of call logs and text message patterns revealed gaps in communication that corresponded exactly with the time frame when Miyonna had disappeared. Miyanna's phone activity during those critical hours showed patterns that contradicted his stated whereabouts and activities. Vehicle forensics provided additional evidence that strengthened the case against him. When investigators examined his car, they discovered physical evidence that supported their growing suspicions about what had occurred during that final ride with his sister. As the investigation intensified, detectives noticed something else troubling: apparent attempts to derail their efforts. Randy Johnson, Jerice's girlfriend, began providing information to law enforcement that later proved to be deliberately misleading. She offered false alibis, claimed to have knowledge about Miyonna's whereabouts that turned out to be fabricated, and actively steered investigators away from productive lines of inquiry. The pattern of obstruction became more apparent when detectives discovered that Johnson had been in contact with Jerice immediately after Miyonna's disappearance, and their communications showed coordination in developing explanations for his whereabouts and activities. Phone records revealed multiple conversations between them during the crucial early hours of the investigation. Johnson's interference went beyond just providing false statements. She attempted to influence other potential witnesses, coached people on what to say to law enforcement, and even tried to remove or alter potential evidence that might implicate Jerice. Her actions were so blatant and persistent that prosecutors later determined they constituted felony obstruction of justice. The investigation faced additional interference from Jerice's grandmother, who also engaged in activities designed to protect him from scrutiny. She provided false information about his whereabouts, attempted to establish false alibis, and worked to create confusion about the timeline of events that investigators were trying to establish. What made this family obstruction particularly frustrating for law enforcement was the timing. While they were wasting precious hours following false leads and verifying fabricated information, the trail was growing colder and potential evidence was being compromised. Despite these obstacles, investigators methodically built their case by cross-referencing multiple sources of evidence. Witness statements, phone records, vehicle forensics, and digital evidence all began pointing in the same direction. Jerice Jones was not just the last one to see his sister alive, but the person responsible for her death. The convergence of evidence became overwhelming. The timeline placed him with Miyonna during the critical period when she disappeared. His changing stories couldn't account for the physical evidence found in his vehicle. His phone records contradicted his stated activities and whereabouts. Most importantly, the systematic attempts by his girlfriend and grandmother to obstruct the investigation suggested consciousness of guilt. Innocent people don't typically orchestrate elaborate cover-ups involving multiple family members providing false information to law enforcement. By November 18, 2022, investigators had assembled enough evidence to move forward with formal charges. The combination of physical evidence, witness testimony, timeline analysis, and the pattern of obstruction created a compelling case that would soon be presented to prosecutors. The investigation had transformed from a missing person case into something far more serious. What started as a search for a teenage girl had become a homicide investigation, with a suspect who had been hiding in plain sight from the very beginning. On November 18, 2022, the case against Jerice Jones entered the formal legal arena when prosecutors filed multiple felony charges that reflected the gravity of what he had done to his sister. The charges were as severe as the North Carolina legal system allowed: first-degree murder, first-degree kidnapping, and first-degree rape. Each charge carried its own legal weight and significance. First-degree murder indicated premeditation and deliberate intent to kill. First-degree kidnapping meant that Miana had been moved against her will with the intent to commit other felonies against her. The rape charge spoke to the sexual violence she had endured before her death. The district attorney's office made a decision that underscored just how heinous they considered these crimes. They announced their intention to seek the death penalty. This wasn't a decision made lightly. Capital punishment in North Carolina is reserved for the most egregious cases, typically involving multiple aggravating factors that elevate a murder above the standard for life imprisonment. Prosecutor teams began preparing what would become one of the most emotionally charged trials in recent Wilmington history. The evidence they planned to present painted a comprehensive picture of premeditated violence that included sexual assault, murder, and the subsequent disposal of Miyonna's body in a landfill. Meanwhile, Johnson and Jerice's grandmother faced their own legal consequences. Johnson was formally charged with felony obstruction of justice, while his grandmother received charges related to hindering the investigation. Their cases would proceed separately, but the prosecution made it clear that their interference had significantly complicated the search for truth. When jury selection began, both sides faced the challenge of finding individuals who could handle the disturbing nature of the evidence while remaining impartial. The case had received significant local media attention, making it difficult to find jurors who hadn't already formed opinions about the defendant's guilt or innocence. The prosecution's opening statement laid out their theory of the case methodically. They told jurors about the morning of November 1st, when Jerice had isolated his sister in his vehicle. They explained how witness testimony, physical evidence, and forensic analysis would prove that he had sexually assaulted and murdered Miana before disposing of her body. Prosecutors emphasized the premeditated nature of the crimes, arguing that Jerice had deliberately created an opportunity to harm his sister when she was most vulnerable. They described how he had exploited her trust as a family member to put her in a position where she couldn't defend herself or escape. The defense team faced an enormous challenge. With overwhelming physical evidence and witness testimony pointing to their client's guilt, they focused on challenging the prosecution's timeline and questioning the reliability of certain witnesses. They attempted to create reasonable doubt about whether the evidence definitively proved premeditation rather than a crime of opportunity. Defense attorneys also raised questions about the investigation itself, suggesting that law enforcement had focused too quickly on Jerice without adequately exploring other possibilities. They argued that the family's protective behavior stemmed from shock and confusion rather than consciousness of guilt. As the trial progressed, prosecutors presented their evidence piece by piece. Forensic experts testified about DNA evidence found in Jerice's vehicle that linked him directly to the crimes. Phone record analysis demonstrated the gaps in communication that aligned with the timeline of Miyonna's disappearance. Witness testimony proved particularly compelling. Multiple people testified about seeing Jerice and Miana together during the critical time frame, contradicting his various explanations about their interaction that morning. The prosecution methodically dismantled each alternative explanation he had provided to investigators. Medical examiner testimony provided disturbing details about the violence Miana had suffered. While these portions of the trial were difficult for everyone present, they established the brutal nature of her death and the sexual assault that preceded it. The prosecution also called law enforcement officers who detailed the obstruction they had encountered from Johnson and the grandmother. This testimony helped establish that people close to Jerice had immediately begun working to prevent the truth from emerging, suggesting they knew what he had done. When the defense presented their case, they called character witnesses who testified about Jerice's behavior prior to the crime. They attempted to show that this was aberrant behavior rather than part of a pattern, hoping to raise questions about premeditation. Defense experts challenged some of the forensic evidence, questioning chain of custody procedures, and suggesting alternative explanations for the physical evidence found in the vehicle. However, their efforts to create reasonable doubt faced the overwhelming weight of multiple forms of evidence, all pointing to the same conclusion. Closing arguments brought the emotional weight of the trial to its peak. Prosecutors reminded jurors of Miana's trust in her brother and how he had violated that trust in the most horrific way possible. They argued that the evidence left no room for doubt about his guilt on all charges. The defense made their final appeal for the jury to carefully consider whether the prosecution had met their burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. They urged jurors to set aside emotion and focus solely on whether the evidence definitively established premeditation and intent. After receiving their instructions from the judge, the jury retired to deliberate. The weight of their decision was enormous. They would determine whether Miyonna Jones would face execution for killing his sister. The verdict, when it came, was decisive. Guilty on all counts. The sentencing phase brought a sense of closure that the community desperately needed, though it could never truly heal the wounds left by Miyonna's death. Judge Patricia Gwynn handed down a life sentence without the possibility of parole, ensuring that Miyonna Jones would spend the remainder of his days behind bars for his crimes against his sister. While prosecutors had sought the death penalty, the life sentence represented the harshest punishment available under the circumstances. For Miyonna, watching her son receive this sentence brought a complex mix of emotions: relief that justice had been served, but also the profound sadness of knowing that both of her children were now lost to her in different ways. The courtroom was packed with community members who had followed the case from the beginning. Many wept openly as the sentence was read, not just for the justice achieved, but for the senseless loss of a young life that had held so much promise. The finality of the legal proceedings marked the end of one chapter, but the beginning of another, ensuring that Miyonna's memory would live on in meaningful ways. Within weeks of the sentencing, New Hanover High School announced the establishment of the Miyonna Jones Memorial Scholarship Fund. This annual scholarship would be awarded to students who embodied the qualities Miyonna had demonstrated during her life: kindness, academic dedication, and a commitment to helping others in their community. The Scholarship Selection Committee decided that recipients would be chosen not just for academic achievement, but for their demonstrated character and service to others. Students who had shown the same warmth and genuine care for their peers that Miyonna was known for would receive financial assistance to pursue their educational goals. Local community organizations partnered with the school to ensure the scholarship would be sustainable for years to come. Fundraising events became annual traditions, with Miyonna's former classmates, teachers, and community members contributing to keep her memory alive through educational opportunities for future students. The case also sparked significant changes in how local law enforcement handles missing persons reports. Miyonna's frustration with the 24-hour waiting period before filing an official report became a catalyst for policy review throughout the region. The Wilmington Police Department revised their protocols to allow for immediate missing person reports when circumstances suggest potential foul play, regardless of the age of the missing individual. This change meant that future families wouldn't face the same delays that had complicated the search for Miyonna. Training programs for law enforcement officers now include specific modules on recognizing high-risk missing person cases and responding with appropriate urgency. These changes were implemented not just in Wilmington, but shared with other departments throughout North Carolina as a model for improved response procedures. Community advocacy groups emerged from the tragedy, focusing on supporting families dealing with missing persons cases and pushing for continued improvements in law enforcement response. These organizations provide resources, emotional support, and practical assistance to families navigating the complex process of searching for missing loved ones. The Miyonna Jones case became a teaching tool in criminal justice programs, not just for the investigative techniques used, but for understanding the impact of family violence and the importance of community response to missing persons cases. Her story helps train future law enforcement professionals about the complexities of familial crimes and the need for thorough, immediate responses. Memorial events became an annual tradition in Wilmington, with community members gathering each November to remember Miyonna and other victims of family violence. These gatherings serve multiple purposes: honoring the memory of those lost, supporting survivors of domestic and family violence, and educating the public about recognizing warning signs and seeking help. Local schools implemented expanded safety education programs that address not just stranger danger, but the realities of violence within families and trusted relationships. These programs help young people understand that safety threats can come from unexpected sources and provide resources for seeking help when needed. Miyonna has become an advocate for missing persons cases and family violence awareness. Her voice carries the weight of lived experience, and she uses her platform to push for continued improvements in how these cases are handled. Her advocacy work ensures that other families might avoid some of the obstacles she faced during the search for her daughter. The case also influenced legislation at the state level. with lawmakers reviewing policies around missing persons investigations and family violence prevention. Miyonna's story became part of the legislative record as representatives worked to improve protections for vulnerable individuals and response protocols for law enforcement. If Miyonna's story has moved you today, please take a moment to like this video and share it with others. Her memory deserves to reach as many people as possible, and your engagement helps keep important stories like hers in the spotlight. Subscribe to True Crime Case Tapes for more cases that honor victims' memories while working toward a safer future for everyone. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Miyonna's impact reaches far beyond Wilmington, and we'd love to hear how her story has affected you. Thank you for helping us remember Miyonna Jones and supporting the ongoing fight for justice.